The $69 billion collapse. How Kwon fooled Wall Street and destroyed $40 billion in 48 hours. In May 2022, a 30-year-old Korean entrepreneur watched from his luxury apartment in Singapore as $40 billion evaporated in less than 2 days, taking with it the life savings of millions of people worldwide, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it. This is the story of Kwon, the Stanford-educated founder who convinced the world's smartest investors that he had solved the fundamental problem of cryptocurrency, built a $20 billion empire on what critics called a mathematical impossibility, and then watched it all burn while tweeting memes and drinking expensive wine. But here's what makes this story truly insane. 6 months before the collapse, Kwon was openly mocking the people who warned that his system would fail, challenging them to bet against him. And even after everything crashed, after suicide hotlines were pinned to cryptocurrency forums, after people lost their entire retirement funds, he went into hiding and continued to insist he had done nothing wrong. This isn't just a story about cryptocurrency. This is a story about hubris, about how a charismatic founder can convince brilliant people to ignore basic mathematics, and about how the promise of easy money can make rational humans believe in magic. So let me take you back to 2018, when a young computer science graduate named Kwon had an idea that would eventually destroy more wealth in 2 days than the GDP of most countries. Kwon wasn't your typical crypto founder. He didn't come from poverty with a chip on his shoulder. He didn't drop out of college to pursue a dream. He was actually the definition of privilege and success, educated at Stanford University, worked at Apple and Microsoft, incredibly intelligent, articulate, and most importantly, he had the kind of confidence that made people want to believe him. In 2018, he co-founded Terraform Labs with the mission to create a stablecoin called Terra USD, or USD. And here's where you need to understand something crucial, because this is where the entire story hinges. Most stablecoins like USDC or Tether are supposed to maintain their $1 value because they're backed by actual dollars or treasury bonds sitting in a bank somewhere. It's simple, boring, and relatively safe. One token equals $1 in reserves. But Kwon thought this was inefficient. He believed he could create a stablecoin that maintained its dollar peg through algorithms and economic incentives rather than actual dollar reserves, and this is where LUNA comes in. The Terra ecosystem had 2 tokens: USD, the stablecoin that was supposed to always equal $1, and LUNA, a volatile cryptocurrency that acted as a counterbalance. The mechanism worked like this. If USD started trading above $1, the algorithm would incentivize people to burn LUNA to create new USD, increasing USD supply and bringing the price back down to $1. And if USD fell below $1, people could burn USD to create LUNA, decreasing USD supply and pushing the price back up. In theory, this created a self-balancing system that didn't need actual dollar reserves, just mathematical elegance and market incentives. Kwon called it algorithmic stability, and he sold this vision with the fervor of a prophet. Now here's where things get absolutely wild. Because Kwon wasn't content with just creating another cryptocurrency, he wanted to build an entire financial ecosystem on top of USD. And the crown jewel of this ecosystem was something called Anchor Protocol. Anchor was a savings protocol that offered a 20% annual return on USD deposits. Let me repeat that: 20% annually, at a time when American savings accounts were offering maybe 0.5%. This wasn't some shady scheme hidden in the dark corners of the internet. This was being promoted as a safe, stable savings account that just happened to pay 40 times what traditional banks offered. And people, lots of people, smart people, poured their money into it. The pitch was seductive. Deposit your USD into Anchor, earn 20% per year, and because USD is pegged to the dollar, you don't have the volatility risk of other cryptocurrencies. It was supposed to be the best of both worlds: crypto returns with stablecoin safety. But here's what Kwon wasn't loudly advertising. Those 20% returns weren't coming from productive economic activity, they were coming from new money flowing into the system, and from the LUNA Foundation Guard, a reserve fund that Terraform Labs had created. This should have been a massive red flag, because any financial system that pays existing investors with new investor money has a name. It's called a Ponzi scheme. But Kwon had an answer for everything. He insisted this was just a temporary promotional rate to bootstrap adoption, that eventually the yields would come from real economic activity in the Terra ecosystem. And for a while, it worked. I mean, it really worked. By early 2022, the total value locked in the Terra ecosystem had reached over $30 billion. LUNA, the counterbalance token, had soared to over $100 per coin, and Kwon had become a cryptocurrency celebrity with hundreds of thousands of Twitter followers. He was giving interviews to major financial publications, appearing at conferences, and most importantly, he was raising money from some of the biggest names in venture capital. Lightspeed Venture Partners, Galaxy Digital, Pantera Capital, these weren't random cryptocurrency enthusiasts. These were sophisticated institutional investors who had done due diligence and decided that Terra was the future of finance. The validation from traditional finance gave Terra an aura of legitimacy that most crypto projects could only dream of, and Kwon leveraged this ruthlessly. If Wall Street believes in us, his logic went, how could we possibly fail? But behind the scenes, some people were sounding alarms, and Kwon's response to criticism reveals everything you need to know about what was coming. In March 2022, just 2 months before the collapse, a pseudonymous crypto researcher named Sensei Algode published a detailed thread explaining why Terra's algorithmic stablecoin was fundamentally flawed. The argument was mathematical. In a bank-run scenario where confidence evaporates and everyone tries to exit at once, there's no amount of LUNA that can be created to absorb the selling pressure. Because as more LUNA gets created, its price falls, which means you need to create even more LUNA to maintain the USD peg, which drives LUNA's price down further, creating a death spiral. This wasn't conspiracy theory nonsense. This was basic economics, and other cryptocurrency experts were making similar points. Kwon's response? He went on Twitter and publicly mocked the critics. He challenged them to bet against Terra. He called them poor and jealous, and he cultivated an army of Terra believers who would attack anyone who questioned the system. This kind of toxic confidence, this absolute certainty in the face of legitimate criticism, this is the hallmark of every financial disaster in history from Enron to the Ranos. The pattern is always the same: a charismatic founder, a complex system that few people fully understand, aggressive dismissal of critics, and a community of believers who have staked their identity on the success of the project. But here's where Kwon made a decision that would ultimately seal Terra's fate. In March 2022, the LUNA Foundation Guard announced they were building a Bitcoin reserve worth billions of dollars to help defend the USD peg in case of emergency. On the surface, this seemed like a responsible move, but what it actually revealed was that Kwon knew the algorithmic mechanism alone wasn't sufficient. He was hedging his bets, buying actual reserves to back USD, which was the exact thing he had claimed was unnecessary. The foundation raised over $3 billion and used it to buy Bitcoin, which they held as a backstop for USD. This decision would later become crucial, but not in the way Kwon expected. And then in early May 2022, everything started to unravel, and it happened faster than anyone thought possible. On May 7th, USD started losing its dollar peg, dropping to 98 cents. This had happened before in small amounts, but usually the arbitrage mechanism would kick in and restore the peg within hours. But this time was different. The selling pressure kept increasing and USD kept falling. Now there's debate about what actually triggered the death spiral. Some people believe it was a coordinated attack by a large trader or group of traders who understood the system's vulnerabilities and deliberately exploited them. Others think it was simply a loss of confidence that spread organically as people started questioning whether 20% yields were sustainable. The truth is, it doesn't really matter what the spark was because the system was always vulnerable to this kind of run. It was built into the fundamental design. As USD fell below its peg, the algorithmic mechanism started creating massive amounts of LUNA to try to absorb the selling pressure. On May 8th, LUNA was trading at around $60. By May 9th, it had fallen to $30, and then the death spiral accelerated. As LUNA's price fell, it took more and more LUNA to absorb each dollar of USD selling pressure, which meant the algorithm had to create more LUNA, which drove the price down further, which required even more LUNA creation. Within 48 hours, LUNA went from $60 to literally fractions of a cent. And USD, the stablecoin that was supposed to always equal $1, fell to 10 cents. $40 billion of value gone, evaporated, destroyed. The LUNA Foundation Guard tried to use their Bitcoin reserves to defend the peg. They sold billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin in a desperate attempt to buy USD and restore confidence. But it was like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. The selling pressure was too massive, too coordinated, too final. And where was Kwon during all this? He was on Twitter, first downplaying the severity, then promising that the team was working on solutions, then going silent as the full magnitude of the disaster became clear. The Anchor protocol, which had been offering those 20% returns, completely collapsed. People who had their life savings in Anchor watched their wealth disappear in real time, unable to withdraw because the system was overloaded with panic selling. The cryptocurrency forums and Reddit communities filled with heartbreaking stories. A man in Korea who had invested his family's entire savings and was now facing bankruptcy. A couple in their 60s who had put their retirement fund into Anchor because they believed Kwon's promises of stable 20% returns. A young developer who had invested everything and was now posting about suicide. The human cost of Terra's collapse was devastating and real, and it extended far beyond the cryptocurrency community. Because as the Luna Foundation Guard dumped billions in Bitcoin to try to save USD, it crashed the entire cryptocurrency market. Bitcoin fell from $40,000 to $28,000 in a matter of days. Ethereum and other cryptocurrencies followed. The total cryptocurrency market cap lost over $300 billion. And while some of that was directly from Terra's collapse, much of it was contagion, fear spreading through the entire ecosystem. But the story gets even worse, because after the collapse, Kwon's response was not what you'd expect from someone who had just destroyed billions of dollars of other people's money. Instead of taking responsibility, instead of apologizing, instead of facing the consequences, he started talking about Terra 2, a new blockchain that would somehow make things right. He proposed abandoning USD entirely and creating a new Luna token that would be distributed to people who had lost money in the original collapse. But here's the insane part. This new token wouldn't actually restore people's losses. It would just give them a share of a new project that had no proven value, no ecosystem, and no reason to succeed where the first version had catastrophically failed. Some people saw this for what it was, a desperate attempt to maintain relevance and control the narrative, but others, incredibly, still believed in Kwon, still thought he could rebuild what he had destroyed. The Terra community split between people demanding accountability and true believers who insisted this was just a temporary setback. And then the legal troubles began. Prosecutors in South Korea started investigating Terraform Labs for possible fraud. American regulators opened investigations. Lawsuits were filed by investors who claimed they had been deceived about the risks of Terra's algorithmic stablecoin. And Kwon, he disappeared in September 2022. Reports emerged that he had fled Singapore, his last known location. South Korean prosecutors issued an arrest warrant. Interpol issued a red notice, and Kwon became an international fugitive. He continued posting on Twitter, claiming he wasn't on the run, that he was simply traveling and had nothing to hide. But he refused to reveal his location and ignored calls to return to South Korea to face investigation. For months, his whereabouts were unknown. There were rumors he was in Dubai, in Serbia, in various countries that don't have extradition treaties with South Korea or the United States. The entire situation became surreal. Here was a man who had destroyed $40 billion, who was wanted by law enforcement in multiple countries. And he was still posting cryptocurrency memes on Twitter and arguing with critics online. In March 2023, nearly a year after Terra's collapse, Kwon was finally arrested in Montenegro, caught at the airport trying to travel on a fake passport. He had been living there for months, apparently believing he could evade capture indefinitely. The arrest should have been the end of the story, but it wasn't, because both South Korea and the United States wanted to extradite him. Both countries had criminal charges pending, and Montenegro's legal system began a lengthy process to determine where he should be sent. As of late 2024, Kwon was still fighting extradition from Montenegro, still posting occasionally on social media, still maintaining that Terra's collapse was not his fault but rather the result of an attack on the protocol. The cognitive dissonance is staggering, the refusal to accept responsibility, the continued insistence that he was the victim rather than the perpetrator. But beyond Kwon's personal story, the Terra collapse revealed something much more disturbing about cryptocurrency and finance in general. It showed how easily smart people can be convinced to ignore fundamental problems when the promise of returns is high enough. It showed how sophisticated venture capital firms can fail at basic due diligence when they're caught up in hype cycles. And it showed how the cryptocurrency industry's resistance to regulation can enable frauds that would be impossible in traditional finance. Think about this. Anchor Protocol was offering 20% annual returns at a time when the Federal Reserve's interest rate was near zero. Basic economics tells you that risk-free returns above the prevailing interest rate are impossible without taking on significant risk somewhere in the system. But people wanted to believe. They wanted to believe that cryptocurrency had somehow transcended the fundamental laws of finance, that algorithmic mechanisms could create value out of thin air. That Kwon had discovered something that thousands of economists and financial engineers had missed. This wasn't stupidity. Many of the people who lost money in Terra were highly educated, financially sophisticated individuals. It was motivated reasoning, the human brain's tendency to find justifications for what we want to be true. And the venture capital firms that invested hundreds of millions into Terraform Labs, they should have known better. They have teams of analysts, they do extensive due diligence. They're supposed to be the gatekeepers who prevent frauds from scaling to billions of dollars. But they were caught up in the same FOMO that drove retail investors. They saw competitors investing in Terra and didn't want to miss out. They saw the total value locked growing exponentially and interpreted that as validation rather than as a red flag. The Terra collapse also exposed the dangers of charismatic founder worship in the tech industry. Kwon wasn't just a CEO, he was treated like a visionary, a genius who had solved impossible problems. And this created a culture where questioning him was seen as betrayal, where raising concerns was met with mockery and aggression, where the community's identity became tied to Terra's success. This pattern repeats constantly in tech and finance. From WeWork to the Ranos to FTX, we keep falling for the same archetype, the confident founder who promises to revolutionize an industry, who dismisses critics as backwards or jealous, who cultivates a community of believers who will attack anyone who questions the narrative. And every time, there are warning signs that get ignored because we want to believe in the vision. In Terra's case, the warning signs were everywhere. Algorithmic stablecoins had failed before. Financial systems that promise above-market returns without commensurate risk are always fraudulent or fragile. Kwon's aggressive dismissal of critics was a red flag. The fact that Anchor's yields had no sustainable source was obvious to anyone who looked closely. But the most important lesson from Terra isn't about cryptocurrency specifically. It's about human nature and financial systems. We're now 400 years past the Dutch tulip bubble. We've had countless financial manias and crashes. We've developed sophisticated regulations and risk management frameworks. And yet we keep making the same mistakes. We keep believing that this time is different, that this new technology or financial innovation has transcended the old rules. The truth is that nothing has changed about the fundamentals. Returns require risk, stability requires reserves or backing, and sustainable financial systems cannot pay existing investors with new investor money indefinitely. These laws are as fundamental as gravity, and just as you can't defy gravity by believing hard enough, you can't defy economic reality with algorithms and confidence. Kwon thought he could. He convinced billions of dollars worth of investors that he could, and when reality reasserted itself, $40 billion disappeared in 48 hours. Today, the Terra collapse stands as one of the largest and fastest wealth destructions in history. It triggered a cascade of failures across the cryptocurrency industry. It directly contributed to the collapse of Three Arrows Capital, a major crypto hedge fund, which in turn triggered the bankruptcy of Celsius and Voyager, other cryptocurrency lending platforms, and the contagion spread from there, ultimately contributing to the conditions that led to FTX's collapse 6 months later. The total damage, direct and indirect, is impossible to calculate, but it's certainly hundreds of billions of dollars. And what about the victims, the people who lost everything? Some have moved on, written off their losses as expensive lessons, but others are still fighting in bankruptcy courts, hoping to recover pennies on the dollar. Many will never financially recover. Retirements have been destroyed, families have been bankrupted, and the psychological toll of losing everything based on promises that prove to be lies is incalculable. The Terra collapse is a reminder that in finance, arrogance is expensive, not for the arrogant founder who gets to flee to Montenegro and fight extradition while posting on Twitter, but for the thousands of ordinary people who believed his promises and lost everything. So the next time you see a financial product promising returns that seem too good to be true, the next time you encounter a charismatic founder who dismisses all critics as fools, the next time you feel FOMO because everyone else is investing in something you don't fully understand, remember Kwon, remember Terra. Remember that $40 billion can disappear in 48 hours when the foundation is built on nothing but algorithms and hubris, and remember that in the end, you can't outsmart basic economics no matter how confident you are. No matter how smart you think you are, and no matter how many people believe in your vision.